This needs to be said first and foremost. All views expressed in this video are my own, not necessarily shared with the creators of Digimon Digital Adventures, and this video is definitely not officially sponsored by them, Toei, Bandai, or anyone else with the rights to Digimon or the system at hand. Now that we covered character creation, it's time to get into the general mechanics of DDA. This doesn't really require much introduction, and really should be a relatively short video, a godsend for me after that last one on Digimon character creation. I should note though, that video had a few errors, mostly typos on my part, or formatting errors because Sony Vegas hates me. So if you would, when you watch that video, if you haven't already, check the pinned comment for any corrections. First, we need to cover the two types of roles in DDA, skill checks and pool checks. Skill checks are, as the name implies, generally used for testing a character's skill outside of combat. Pool checks, meanwhile, are generally used within combat for things like attacking and defending. Skill checks are made as 3d6 plus modifiers, and are used when trying to achieve a specific target number set by the GM or against an opposed stat, specifically when clashing, which we'll discuss in the combat video. These roles are, by the admission of the system itself, the most commonly used roles in DDA. If the outcome of something is in question, your GM will make you roll a skill check. As we've discussed, humans are generally better at skill checks, but this is because the modifiers they use generally add up to a higher value than any Digimon could hope to reach with their spec values. Though, as we also discussed in part 3, there are some qualities that can change this. Humans roll 3d6 plus an attribute plus the skill within that attribute associated with the skill check at hand to make skill checks. You can also add aspects or take penalties from them at this point. However, if a human has no points in the skill being used as a modifier, they suffer a -1 penalty. This is because your human not only has no training, but they've let it atrophy. Digimon instead add CPU, bit, or RAM depending on what kind of check is being made, unless they have improved derived stat or prodigious skill for the relevant attribute or skill. This means, generally speaking, your human character is going to be best suited for making skill checks, though sometimes your GM might force you to use one character over the other depending on the situation. To determine whether a check succeeds or fails, the GM compares the player's result to a target number, or TN for short. The chart on screen now shows the scale of target numbers against the difficulty of the task for that value. If the game uses enhanced for the tier of play, they are all increased by 2. If the GM is running the game with extreme instead, they are increased by +4. This is to counterbalance the increased caps and thus stats and skills granted by these tiers. Succeeding by 5 or more on a skill check is a critical success. How this is described depends on the GM, but generally speaking the GM should reward such a roll with an additional bonus on top of what was trying to be achieved, or the ability to drag the less competent members of the party along for the ride with a bit of effort. Failing by 5 or more means you have critically failed, however. Not only did your character fail to do what they were doing, but there's also a further penalty that's being applied, or some sort of other consequence. Perhaps your character tried to make an athletics check to reach a high ledge, but falls down and skins their knee for 1 wound box of damage. The depths of skill checks means that there are usually various ways any test of skill can play out. Thanks to inspiration, if things go poorly at any point, your character has a bit of a safety net, but I'd personally recommend saving that inspiration for torment checks, or the next kind of check I'm about to talk about, pool checks. Pool checks are almost exclusively used for combat, as the document notes. Accuracy, dodge, and health are basically the only times you'll roll a pool check, though as we've established, some qualities such as Black Mage let you roll spec values as a pool. Pool checks are written as XD6, where X is the number of D6 dice you're going to roll. Success on a pool check is a 5 or 6, but unlike skill checks, there are no critical successes or failures on pool checks. You either roll a 5 or higher, or you fail. This is on each individual die, however. Unlike a regular skill check where you add up the total, a pool check counts each separate die in the pool as its own success or failure, and then you add those results up to get total successes. When a Digimon or Tamer rolls their accuracy or dodge stat, they roll a pool of d6s equal to the stat in question, adding modifiers before rolling. For example, if your Digimon has an accuracy of 10 and weapon 1, they would roll 11d6 when they make an attack with that weapon attack, but only 10d6 when rolling a different attack. In response, the target of the attack rolls dodge. Again, for the sake of example, let's say your Digimon is attacked and has 7 dodge. This means they will roll 7d6. I will explain this further in the next video, the one on combat, so don't worry too much about this for now. This is just sort of an explanation of pool checks. When combat ends, your Digimon rolls its health stat as a d6 pool, recovering 1 wound box for each success it gets. Humans, on the other hand, roll body plus endurance as a d6 pool to recover wound boxes. Again, these will be further detailed in the combat video. In DDA 1.4, there is an additional mechanic to add some extra pizzazz to skill checks. This is called stunting, with the act itself being referred to as, well, stunt. You aren't just rolling a skill check and attempting to do something, you're throwing in some extra descriptor to show how your character is doing the check in a way beyond just, well, doing what they need to. For example, your character doesn't just try to climb a wall, they're moving quickly and leaping from handhold to handhold like Drake from Uncharted or Lara Croft. The GM can use this as a way to give a bonus to players who go the extra mile when making even the most basic of skill checks by granting a bonus from +1 all the way to +3. If the player does something particularly crazy to try and pass a skill check, with the matching description of course, the GM might even add additional d6s to the roll, going so high as 5d6 for the most amazing checks possible. Tamers aren't the only ones who can stunt though. Digimon can too, and this can actually be more beneficial for Digimon since their skill checks are naturally weaker. Next up, teamwork. This can be used in addition to stunting, but also on its own. It has party members making separate checks to bolster someone else's skill check. When another character makes a skill check, you can declare your attempt to aid them and describe how you do so. You roll the same skill check as the first person, and your target number is 14. If the character using teamwork rolls a 14 or more, the first character gets a +2 to their check. A critical success, a 19 or higher, sees this being increased to a bonus of +5. However, a critical failure means that the person being helped takes a -2 penalty. Everyone other than the character making the initial skill check can make one of these once per skill check, including Digimon. Finally is mounting target numbers. In some cases, characters just won't be able to make it past an obstacle with one single skill check. In these cases, this mechanic comes into play. A character makes multiple skill checks as determined by the GM. Each target number is increased by one stage over the last within the collection of rolls for this. Then, the GM records crit fails, successes, and crit successes. The last roll is ultimately the only one that matters, but for each success the character got along the way, they get +1 to the final roll, and for each crit success they get a whopping +5. However, for each failure they suffer a -1, and a critical failure imposes a brutal -5 penalty to the final roll. I rarely see these kinds of rolls used in play, but I'd say they're best suited for obstacle course type situations where they need to do a lot of things quickly to prevent a disaster. The next section is the bread and butter of all Digimon, Evolution. When certain conditions are met, partner Digimon gain the ability to evolve to a higher stage. Generally speaking, this is one stage per evolution. DDA doesn't have any real hard and fast rules for what causes evolution, because this is generally up to the GM and may or may not be discussed with the players during Session 0, but it does have some suggestions listed as basic conditions to build upon. Firstly, the Digimon must be well cared for and healthy, though this doesn't factor in wound boxes that are missing. If you haven't been caring for your partner's well-being, they won't have it in them to evolve. Next is the tamer and the Digimon having a bond strong enough for the stage they're at. What this means can vary greatly, but generally it shows companionship and camaraderie at a level beyond just associates or partners of obligation. Third is the tamer being in trouble, usually physical danger. This means that interceding can often lead to a Digimon evolving if their tamer is about to be taken out by a hostile Digimon, but don't rely on it too much. Lastly, the tamer has to be displaying some kind of virtue. This can vary wildly as well, but I'd recommend them either overcoming a torment or acting in a way that represents their major aspects positive. While the first time a Digimon reaches a higher stage of evolution is up to the narrative being played out, the GM should generally let the player keep that stage as its new base stage if they have 15 bonus DP over that stage's value. For example, Rookie Digimon with 15 bonus DP could keep the Champion as their base stage once they reach it for the first time. A good example of this is Gatomon from Digimon Adventure. She is a Champion Digimon, and it is her base form. However, your GM might disagree with this idea, and if they do, you should defer to their judgment as per Rule 0. Even if your GM allows this, you can't maintain Ultra or higher with this rule, however. That much power puts stress on a Digimon, and so they need to revert back to at least Mega to regain their strength. Generally, the advantages of keeping your Digimon at a lower stage are for the purposes of keeping them hidden unless their higher stages are around human-sized in height or smaller. For example, generally a Diarchmon is going to be far less conspicuous than a Greymon, though still rather conspicuous given Diarchmon's appearance, due to the former generally being smaller than the latter in most examples of the anime, though Digimon scale is not fixed and your Digimon can be any size class you want it to be, regardless of the species. For example, in the Film Festival short, also known as Act 1 of Digimon the Movie in the West, the Agumon there was most definitely on the smaller end of large, whereas Greymon was huge. Another benefit to evolving in combat is that your Digimon recovers all their wound boxes provided the evolution is a higher stage. This means that keeping your Digimon at a lower level can lead to the potential to heal mid-fight, which can be very important if nobody in your party has 0 unit or the regenerate effect. Slide evolution, that is, shifting from one stage of equal power to another, which will be described further in the combat section, does not heal the Digimon fully. Instead, their previous wound box total is applied to the slide evolve form. Slide evolution is a niche mechanic meant to reference Digimon Frontier mainly, so unless your GM wants to give you multiple evolutions to choose from like a V-Pet or other video game, you usually won't see this mechanic at work. As I mentioned in the Digimon creation video, each stage of a Digimon has its own new character sheet. Digimon aren't like Pokemon. They don't have a fixed evolution path, not really. Though in the anime they tend to have one for the sake of the narrative, and I would recommend something similar for DDA. Still, it doesn't hurt to plan things out ahead of time. Even if your GM allows slide evolution, your GM would appreciate you having all of the sheets prepared ahead of time. If you don't know what you're doing because you ignored the first video in this series and for some reason are still here, why would you do that to yourself, man? But fine. If you don't know anything about Digimon and their evolution, check the description for a link to Wikimon where you can look up every single Digimon that exists. Keep in mind the evolutions on Wikimon are just ones that have been shown, you know, like in the anime and games, that sort of thing. And really, any Digimon could potentially evolve into any other Digimon of a higher stage, or come from another Digimon of a lower stage. For example, Agumon, according to Wikimon, can evolve into a lot of Digimon, including Greymon and Geogreymon, which are both used in the anime. However, in one game I play in, my Digimon started as, in part, an Agumon that evolved into a Kinkakumon. Mostly because I thought the hats looked similar between Greymon and Kinkakumon. But the point is, Digimon are very malleable in how they evolve, and as long as you run the line by your GM, it shouldn't be an issue. You should have an idea of what the stages are and have them set it out before the game actually starts. You do this because evolution can just happen. It's a thing that happens as part of the story, and the story just sort of happens based on what happens in the game, what people are doing. So having it planned out means you can just break the news sheet out when your Digimon evolves. The document says you might not need the whole line at the game start, but unless your GM explicitly says not to stat out the entire line at the start, I'd say do it. It keeps you from having to stumble if something unexpected happens, like your Digimon getting knocked down a stage or getting an evolution early. GMs, on the other hand, should keep any special requirements to evolve close to their chest. It's not because you're trying to be a jerk or something, it's just to keep an element of surprise and prevent players from just grinding out a higher stage by meeting those requirements like a video game. As the document mentions though, seeking answers in character can be a viable tactic for the players. If they go through the trouble to show interest in how to reach a new stage of evolution, you could send them on a quest to meet a wise Digimon who's gained clarity on the method of evolution and mentor them in that. And it's a good way to tell them how to reach the next stage without directly telling them how to reach the next stage. There are, however, a few alternate evolution methods. The ones listed above are basic and the core of how evolution should work, but these alternate methods are based on ones from the anime series, generally speaking, and despite the potential interesting outcomes, a GM should not include more than 1 or 2 of these in any game. First up is armor evolution. How it happens usually varies wildly, but generally speaking, player characters need something called a Digimental. They're egg-shaped objects that hold the power of a virtue and can allow your partner to reach a new stage of evolution without evolving naturally. Usually, like with the anime Digimon Adventure 02, these are used to circumvent any sort of block on normal evolution. The easiest way to do this is to have the players make a champion Digimon, but grant access to Digizoid Armor Chrome and Digizoid Weaponry Chrome. Exceptions to this would be Magnamon or Rapidmon Gold, who are probably best statted as perfect or mega level Digimon, and getting a colored Digizoid for free. The next type of evolution is the most dramatic type, Dark Evolution. Since a lot of games of DDA tie the evolution to the tamer's emotional state, having their darker thoughts twist the Digimon's evolution can be a great boon for character development and a way to throw in tension into a fight. All it takes is the tamer to be distracted by negative emotion, fear, hatred, jealousy, and so on, for a Digimon to dark evolve. At first, the tamer might find a deranged joy in the process. Their partner has evolved and thus are stronger and can delete whatever threat is in front of them. However, they should soon realize that this is no longer their friend. This is a monster. The GM determines how this works and when it happens, and if the event hits a player or character hard enough, it could even unmark some or all of their marked torment boxes. Dark Evolution doesn't just boost the Digimon stage by 1 high. It brings the Digimon under control of the GM using the rules from Berserker, with a few differences. First off, rather than gaining the bonuses Berserker would grant, it grants a flat +2 to all stats. This means the GM can just reuse the player's normal Digimon of the Dark Evolved Digimon stage and slap +2 onto its stats and reflavor its attacks and appearance. Second, it will not stop fighting until one of 3 things happens. It must defeat all enemies and allies present, be reduced to 0 wound boxes, or the tamer has to succeed on a willpower skill check with a target number of 18 for standard, 20 for enhanced, or 22 for extreme. If the tamer crit fails, however, the Dark Evolution goes even further beyond, and their rage overflows, granting them another +2 to all their stats. This can stack infinitely, meaning a tamer who Dark Evolves their partner and whose willpower and luck are lacking could end up creating a truly unstoppable monster. When the evolution finally ends, however, the Digimon drops to 1 stage below its base, as the process not only strains the Digimon, it drains their power. If the process was bad enough, the Digimon might even drop all the way down to their fresh stage. In my opinion, Dark Evolved Digimon should, when controlled by the GM, first go after the nearest hostile target. Then the nearest viable target after that, friend or foe. This gives the players time to get some distance and plan on how to deal with the new threat. It also makes sense narratively, really, especially if your game has human death as an option. It isn't a core rule in 1.4, but there are rules for it in 1.3, which I will touch on in the combat video as an alternative rule, as the dev has mentioned that if you want to keep death in the game for humans, then use the 1.3 rules. A Digimon that loses their tamer might lose themselves to grief and Dark Evolve to slay the enemy that killed their friend, only to lose control and turn on their other allies. Ultimately, Dark Evolution is a powerful narrative tool for GMs and players alike. The next type is called DNA Evolution or Joint Progress, also known as Jogress. The document also mentions Apgatai, but that's reserved for Apla Monsters, which is a spin-off of Digimon, so for most purposes, either DNA Evolution or Jogress are going to be used. There's also Digicross from Digimon Cross Wars, known as Digimon Fusion in the West, but again, that's sort of its own thing. When 2 or more Digimon fuse, they gain the power beyond the sum of their parts, regardless of what it's called, however. 2 humans who are fusing their Digimon need a strong bond with each other, such as siblings or best friends, to do this, and their Digimon must be of the same stage to fuse into a single entity. The new Digimon is 1 stage over the 2 components. For example, X-Vmon and Stingmon, 2 champion Digimon, Jogress into Pyldramon, a perfect Digimon. To achieve Jogress, both tamers must first make a skill check of 3d6 plus willpower plus bravery, minus the number of unchecked torment boxes they have, with a target number of 18 for standard, 20 for enhanced, and 22 for extreme. Both humans must pass or the Jogress fails. When it succeeds, the action pool becomes 3 for the Digimon and tamers, split among them. We'll discuss this more later in the combat section, but basically you, the other player, and your fused Digimon share 3 actions among each other. The benefit here is that not only can both tamers potentially direct the Digimon at the same time, their special orders can stack, and this is the only way to do so. This Jogress Digimon has a unique pool of DP to build from. A perfect Digimon would have 70 DP, a Mega 90, and an Ultra would have 105. This makes Jogress incredibly powerful, but be warned, when it ends, it can put the party on the back foot. This is because the component Digimon revert to 1 stage below their base stage when the fusion ends. The GM has to approve this as it is an optional rule, so speak to them, and preferably the other player character you wish to Jogress with, if you want to use it. Of course, if you've got the role-playing chops and your GM is up to the challenge themselves, you could talk about dual partners, a variant rule which we'll discuss more in the GM section. Hybrid evolution is either the tamer and Digimon fusing to become one, or a human gaining the power to turn into a Digimon. Part Digimon, part human, but all power. Hybrid Digimon are not their own stage. They share the stage types with normal Digimon. But there are some limitations and bonuses. First off, it's easier to roleplay your character, but you're sacrificing the sort of duality and ability to develop your character by bouncing off of your other. Generally, Digimon serve as complements or contrasts to help the human grow and change, but with a hybrid character, you sort of lose that. However, you do get to focus more on the character you're playing, without sacrificing any mechanical benefits of playing a Digimon Tamer pair. Second, skill checks are made from the Tamer's skill and attributes, as well as using aspects. A hybrid Digimon cannot use their human skills on a class check. That falls to the result of Digimon. In combat, the character uses the Digimon stats, qualities, and derived stats. Finally, hybrid Digimon gain a bonus simple action to use. Hybrid Digimon are kinda weird, and generally best suited to either final evolution, such as Matrix Evolution from Digimon Tamers, or full games emulating Digimon Frontier, where the humans become the Digimon. The last type of evolution mentioned is Slide Evolution, but it's going to be covered in the combat section, as that is where it's detailed. It'll be discussed in the next video, so put a pin in it. We'll get back to it next week. The last section of this video is character advancement. At the end of each session, the GM hands out experience points, XP, and bonus DP. At least 2 XP and 1 bonus DP should be given out every session, whether they did anything or not. The document lists several ideas, but also uses many cases of every session or each instance. Personally, and I say this as someone whose games tend to run into the high bonus DP values both as a player and a GM, like around 60 to 70, you should only award XP and DP based on this list if it happens at all. So if the players have 3 fights, they get 1 XP and 1 DP. This can considerably slow the growth of characters for long-term games, which, in my opinion, is a good thing. 70 bonus DP DDA is basically Rocket Tag. Anyways, the list on the screen now isn't an end-all, be-all, and if you're the GM, feel free to make up your own requirements to earn XP and DP, but do let your players know. We will discuss how the system recommends the GM hands out XP and DP in another video specifically for GMs, so, if you haven't yet, subscribe and stay tuned so that you know when that video goes live. Human advancement is the most complicated. Increasing an attribute for a human costs XP equal to the new rating doubled. For example, raising an attribute from 5 to 6 costs 12 XP. Raising a skill only costs as much XP as the new rank of the skill. For example, raising your Persuade from 4 to 5 costs 5 XP. You can also buy Inspiration. The cost is 2 for every point of Inspiration you have. If you have none, it costs 2 XP, but if you have 3 Inspiration, it costs 6 XP to get a 4th point. The last 2 ways to advance a human require GM permission. First is modifying an aspect. It costs 3 XP to modify an aspect into something more appropriate for the game. Second is marking off torment boxes. The cost is the number of marked off boxes you have on that torment plus 1. So if you had 3 marked boxes on a torment, it would cost 4 XP to mark the 4th. Digimon advancement is much simpler. Expenditures are made on the Digimon's base stage, and raising a stat costs 1 DP per point put into the stat. It also carries this increase to all other stages of that Digimon. And now you can see why in the Digimon video I suggested to make your Digimon stat spread about the same across all its stages. It's because this process is more efficient and less of a pain later on. Qualities are similar. If you spend any DP on qualities, you must spend the same amount on the same value in qualities on the other stages. For example, taking Agility on your Digimon means you could just buy Agility on all stages, or take Avoidance if the stage you're buying on already has Agility. You could also split it into something like Charge Attack and a rank of Speedy. As long as you spend a total of 2 DP on qualities for this example, you're fine. Of note, the document touches on character development using its example characters, but I find that something you can't really plan out and is more of something that just naturally occurs. As such, I'm not really going to cover this section. The path your characters walk is determined by you, the other players, the GM, and the dice. My advice is, rather than trying to plan out some big arc of your character, have an idea of how they'll grow and change, but be ready to adapt on the fly, because the dice are fickle and anything can happen. And with that, we bring an end to this video. Next time, we'll be diving headfirst into combat. If you want to know when that video goes live, hit the subscribe button, and if this video or any other in the series were helpful to you in learning DDA, I'd appreciate a like. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch for updates on the videos and stream notifications, and when I finish this series, I'll go back to my normal streaming schedule. Though I also intend to live stream the example character I'm going to make later in the series, so stay tuned! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.